So what happens if your company has more than one support department, which you would expect to be the case? Because it's not like companies just have HR, they have HR, IT, facilities, etc. So it's more plausible that your company has a ton of different support departments. You need to allocate out their costs. So, allocating out costs from multiple support departments could be done in a variety of different ways, but it's definitely a more complicated procedure, especially depending on what type of methodology you choose to get the cost of your support departments into your end game, into your products or into the different service departments that you have. So, we are going to assume in this case that all our stuff is based upon budgeted rather than actual numbers, and that's how we're going to use this in practice. We are going to use for this the same company that we had a second ago, that we're going to be Stokes allocating out costs to our two different departments, market research and public relations. But now we've got multiple departments to deal with because we are going to allocate out HR costs and custodial services. Our estimate over here is that the annual cost of HR is going to be 180,000, while the annual cost of custodial services is going to be 120,000. So we need to figure out how we're going to spread these costs out. And this is where the conundrum lies. HR is obviously going to help out market research and public relations. Custodial service is also going to help out market research and public relations, but they're going to help out each other. Like HR has to hire custodians, custodians have to clean the HR office. So not all of the costs incurred by a support department go into your cost objects over here. A portion of those costs are actually being consumed to support other support departments. We need to come up with some kind of methodology to figure out what is the best way to allocate these costs to all the different places that they're going to end up supporting. We got some information to work with over here, and that is that HR has 3 employees. The custodial services department has 10 employees, market research has 20 employees, and public relations has 10 employees. All in all, our company has 43 people working for us. Our facility is 1,700 square feet in total. 300 of that is dedicated to HR, 200 to custodial services. They don't need a lot of space to store all of their stuff, and they're usually running around the building cleaning. Market research has 700 square feet, and public relations has 500 square feet. And then we got to allocate out $300,000 worth of support department costs in total, 180 coming from HR, 120 coming from custodial. And those costs for each respective department are going to go to all of the other different elements. How are we going to do this? Well, there's three methodologies, at least three methodologies covered in this text. And they are the direct method, the step down method, and the reciprocal method. Going down that list, each methodology gets better, but it also gets more complicated to compute. So let's start from the beginning. And in the beginning, we're going to start with the direct method. And under the direct method, you assume that even though it's not a plausible situation, that support departments never spend time supporting other support departments. All of their time, all of their input goes into supporting your actual end game cost objects. In this case, our two different departments, public relations and market research. So no cross-departmental support going on here whatsoever, just to simplify our calculations, even though it's not a realistic scenario. For HR, we're going to take our $180,000 of expected annual costs and we're going to base it on employee headcount. It makes sense as a driver. Like HR is in the process of dealing with employees and helping people. Well, the more employees the department has, the more time HR is consuming to assist them. So in this case, back to our table over here, we have two end game uh, production departments that we have to send information or send HR support to. They are market research and their public relations. Well, market research has 20 people, public relations has 10 people. That's 30 in total. Two-thirds of them, 20 out of the 30, work in market research, and one-third, 10 out of 30, works in public relations. So let's go and send two-thirds of our cost to the department with 20 employees to market research, and the other third of our HR costs to public relations. And that breaks down two-thirds of 180,000 is 120,000 going to market research, and one-third of 180,000 is $60,000 going to public relations. And there's our little grid over there. This thing does not do a grand job of explaining where these numbers come from. Custodial services is going to allocate it out, but I got you. Going back to our numbers over here, we have $120,000 from custodial services that needs to be allocated. Going back over here, well, custodial services, what makes sense? They got to clean up space. So the more space the department has, the longer it's going to take them to clean. And there's 700 square feet to market research. There's 500 to public relations. That's 1,200 in total. We're going to allocate out the portion of their cost based upon what portion of our square footage between those two departments goes into each department. So if you will, 7/12 of that area is for market research, while the other 500 out of 1,200 total feet, or 5/12, goes to public relations. And they just took that 120,000 and multiplied it by the portion of the combined square footage between those two different departments that each one has. And that's how they arrived at these numbers. 7/12 of 120,000 is 70,000 going to market research. 5/12 of 120,000 is 50,000 going to public relations. So the direct method, HR isn't helping custodial services isn't helping HR. We're going to put all of their costs directly into our end line cost objects. And for all of the numbers down here, when we figure out the cost of running a department over here, we've got 120,000 being allocated from HR to market research and 70,000 from custodial services being allocated to market research. All in all, we're assuming in this case that market research costs us $190,000 in support costs. Same mathematical concept. Public relations costs us $110,000 in support costs, and that's how we'd spread out the $300,000 in support costs that we have if we're going to use the direct method. And the flaw with that is it doesn't make sense. Like there's no way that the custodial services is not cleaning HR, and there's no way that HR is just letting people walk in and get jobs at custodial services. They're out there searching for the best talent. So here, what you're doing is you're trading off simplicity for accuracy. You would have much more accuracy if you assumed that those departments are helping one another. And one way we can do that is the step down method. And in the step down method, you rank your departments by which one, I guess, is the most vital to not only your end game cost objects, but the other departments as well. And you have your top tier department going down the line to all of your lower ranked departments. So for us over here, we are going to assume in this case that HR is the top ranked department that we have, and custodial services is going underneath. Well, we've got to figure out then how we are going to spread these costs out from these different departments. Now, assuming with a step down that HR also needs to spend some of its time assisting custodial services. So, what is our total percentage of time that HR would spend assisting custodial services? Back to our raw information. Do, 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 do. We have 10 employees in public relations, 20 employees in market research, and now we're assuming that HR helps hire a custodian, so 10 in custodial services. That's 40 people in total that the people in HR have to spend their time making sure the pay is good for, hiring the best employees, etc. And 10 out of that 40 in total work in custodial services, or 1/4, if you will, of the employees that HR caters to work in custodial services. Well, if 1/4 of the employees work there, and we're expecting HR to have a certain amount of cost, why don't we assign out 1/4 of their costs to custodial services? So now, with our setup that we got over here, a portion of HR costs as the top tiered support thing in our step down method are going to be assigned to custodial services, but other parts are going to be assigned to market research and to public relations. Custodial services was the second ranked thing in our tier system of how important our different support departments are. And since they're lower than HR, they don't send anything back. If we had a list of 6 different things here, every support department that's higher in the tier sends costs down to the lower ones, but the lower tiered ones never send costs upwards. So custodial services is just going to send its cost to market research and to public relations. And to allocate out HR's costs, we're going to follow that concept. We determined that between custodial services, market research, and public relations, there's a total of 40 employees. 10 of them work in custodial services, 20 work in market research, and 10 of them work in public relations. So that breaks down to 1/4. Let's take 1/4 of that $180,000 of budgeted costs, which is $45,000, and assign it to custodial services. Let's take one half if we reduce this fraction of those $180,000 worth of costs, which is 90,000, and send it to market research. And let's take the last quarter of the 180,000, another 45 grand, and send it to public relations. And so now HR is spreading out all of its different numbers that we have over there. And that is how HR is going to spread out its $180,000 of budgeted costs. And again, make note over here that in the step down, no costs from custodial are going back up to HR. So we're going to spread out all of HR's costs to the two end game departments, market research and public relations. And you might be looking at these numbers right here and saying that does not add up to 120,000. And you're correct. Those two numbers that we're spreading out add up to 165,000. So since HR is assigning a portion of its cost down to custodial services, and custodial services is the second department in the tier, those costs are going to come into custodial services before they spread out their um, allocation to the two different departments that we have. But they found it the same way that we had when we were doing the simpler method earlier, that 7/12 of the space is market research. So we gave them 7/12 of the total $165,000 in cost, while 5/12 of our square footage it was occupied by public relations. So they got 5/12 of the $165,000 in total cost. And there you go. All the costs still got in there. Like in total, between our different support departments, they're still spreading out a total of $300,000 in costs. If you want to go and add these up, that does add up to $300,000. But the methodology we had now is a bit more refined, where we're passing costs down the line to our different support departments before they're spread out to different places. And in the end, what we have here is we've got a little bit different allocation of our $300,000 in total costs. Under this methodology, we're saying that $186,000 worth of indirect support cost was caused by the market research department and therefore should be allocated there, while the other 113,750 is getting allocated to public relations. The step down method is definitely possible in this case, but it gets weird. And if you switch the order of things, you'll come up with entirely different costs for each department. Accounting is a very weird field where it's mostly theory and there's not a lot of direct traceable application to things. What would happen if we switch this around? We said custodial services was going to be our primary, our number one support department in our step down methodology. Well, now they'd be sending costs to HR, and HR wouldn't be sending any back, but the same theory applies. The custodial services would be sending out costs based upon the combined square footage of each one of these. So you can find the total square footage of HR, market research, and public relations, and then spread out their $120,000 in cost proportionally. That $24,000 of cost would go in to HR as well on top of the 180,000 we're budgeting for, so they'd have to spread out 204,000. And now, since they're based upon employees, they would spread out proportionally to how many employees that market research and public relations has. But you can see right here, they are spreading out the full 204,000. But when you do so, it changes your numbers greatly. Like now, market research is getting much more cost allocated to it than public relations. So the profitability of each department that you have, and you're going to want that for managerial decisions to consider what departments to get rid of and what not, changes greatly depending on how you tier things in the step down method. And there's no rule that says this one has to be one, this one has to be two, etc. It's up to your people that know the company best to think what makes the most sense. And definitely will be a matter of debate going on if you have a bunch of accountants on staff on what is the best way to allocate the step down method because it still has a flaw. And the flaw is again, looking at this last thing we had right here, there's no way that HR doesn't spend time hiring people in custodial services and it's not reflected here. So we're coming up with an inaccurate number. It's definitely better than the direct method in terms of accuracy in this case, but it's still not practical. It's not taking into consideration the fact that pretty much every single support department you have is going to help spend some of its time supporting the other support departments and not your actual uh, production departments. So let's get real crazy. And we got the reciprocal method. This one, instead of tiering, you assume what I just said, that every single department supports all the other departments that you have within your organization. And to spread things out, we are unfortunately going to have to use a system of equations. So we have HR. They have $180,000 is their cost. Also, custodial services spends 20% of their time cleaning HR, so the true cost isn't just their 180,000, but 80,000, 180,000 plus the portion of custodial services costs that are used to clean HR. And how you got that is HR is 300 square feet out of the 1,500 square feet of our total facility, and that is 20%. So if they spend the time cleaning up our facility over here and HR is 20% of the space, well, 20% of custodial costs should go in there. What would that look like as a formula? That means HR's costs are equal to $180,000 of their budgeted costs that are inside their department plus 20% of custodial services costs. Let's invert this over here. What are custodial services costs? Well, they've budgeted for $120,000 of internal costs right there, but HR spends time supporting them. Custodial services has 10 employees out of our 40 in total, so one quarter of our work staff works in custodial services, and that's 25% of our overall staff. So 25% of HR's costs would have to go into custodial services. So a formula for custodial services looks like 120,000 plus 0.25 H, which is HR's costs. And now to solve this, we got to do a little bit of math. And here, I love this slide. It's just like, all right, so these are the numbers you're supposed to come up to when you input stuff in that formula. Let's get a little more detailed on how this is supposed to work. And I'm going to bring up a spreadsheet over here. I do believe this is sharing, so let me double check. Sure is. Okay. So we have our formulas, and I'll zoom in for you. And our formulas are that HR has costs of 180,000 times 20% of custodial services cost, and custodial services has total cost of $120,000 plus a quarter of HR's cost. Well, I need to get this into one formula because that's ugly. So what I can do is I can take one of the variables and I can sub the formula for that variable into its place in the equation. Down here, for this H that we had in custodial services, instead of representing it as H in this formula, I'm just going to plug in what I know H to equal, which is 180,000 plus zero point 0.2 times C. And that's how I arrived at this down here. So I just plugged in HR's cost function, if you will, for the cost of HR. And now I've got an equation that I can actually solve. First things first, let's distribute this 0.25 to the things inside the parentheses. And 0.25 times 180,000 is 45,000. 0.25 times zero point 0.2 is 0.05. And then the C is still existing. And now our formula, after I distributed that 0.25 amongst all the stuff in the parentheses, looks like 120,000 plus 45,000 plus 0.05 times C. Well, I got like terms right here, 120,000 and 140, or sorry, 120,000 and 45,000. Let's combine those guys and reduce our formula down to C equals 165,000 plus zero point 0.5 C. And now I can solve for C. I want to get C on its side by itself, so let's subtract 0.5C from this side of the equation, and then we have to do 0.5C from this side of the equation as well. And after I got C all on the left side, my formula comes out as 0.95C equals 165,000. And I can solve that. Little Excel magic right here is 165,000 divided by 0.95. Not 895, 95. Fat fingers. And then when I go and throw that in, making this a little bigger so we can actually read it, it comes out to $173,684.21. Back to our PowerPoint presentation over here. After I reduce this, that's where that number came from. So they went through and they put the formulas together and they solved and they determined that the true cost of our custodial services was $173,684.21. And then, while I won't go through the steps again, they applied the same concept, this time plugging the custodial services cost function into the HR cost function, and that came out to $214,736.84. So we went through and we used that methodology to figure out what the total cost of each department is. And then going on over here, we spread out that total amount of cost proportionally to the different departments that we incurred. Custodial services over here, if you sum up these three numbers over here, you do indeed come up with that figure. If you sum up the blue lines for HR, 107,368 plus 53,684 twice, you do indeed, whoops, sorry, wrong way, do indeed come up with this figure down here. So you're taking that math, figuring out what the total cost of each department is. Yeah, these are the unique costs, but they're also inclusive of the amount of cost that we send to one another. And then you're spreading it out to the different end departments that you have. This is the logically the best methodology, hands down, because your support departments are going to spend time supporting each other. But it was also the ugliest to do right there. We come up with a more refined estimate over here, and under this methodology, we would assign out of our $300,000 in cost this much to market research and 111,578.95 to public relations. Didn't make a huge improvement over the other methodology we had. If I back up some slides here, of 192,000 and 108,000. Like it's more refined than the step down method and it's more accurate, but it didn't make that big of a difference in our overall numbers, which is why, even though this is the best methodology, companies would choose not to use the reciprocal method because the benefit they get from it just doesn't outweigh the extra costs they're going to have to pay people to do all these crazy calculations. And that is the biggest drawback. And while it doesn't seem bad, we had two departments over here, and each service or each support department had to send costs to one other support department. So, two departments with one line going to the other support departments made us do two formulas. But what if we had three departments? Well, if we had three departments, each one of those would send out costs to the two other support departments. So, each department, Department A, we'll call it, would have to send costs to B and C. Department B would have to send costs to A and C, and C would have to send costs to A and B. That's six formulas. And not only that, but you're going to have extra inputs in the formula to make them even longer. And it grows exponentially. And if you have a company that has 12 different support departments in it, you are going to be doing an ungodly amount of formulas in there, and each one of those formulas is going to have, 11 variables in it or whatever. It's a mathematical nightmare. So back in the day, no one ever wanted to do that. And that's why all of the step down method, et cetera, were created because there were easier things to work around that weren't as time consuming that gave you a fairly accurate prediction. But times do change, and we've got all sorts of stuff that happens now. You're going to need a matrix, as they call it, and you're going to have to perform matrix algebra to solve that formula. And to do it by hand would take literally, I don't even know, hours. I couldn't even tell you how long it would take me to go through by hand and solve out, the allocation of support costs for a company that has 12 different departments and seven different product lines that stuff has to get sent to. It would easily take me an entire day. I wouldn't be surprised if it took me days to do so. No one wants to spend that much time just for more accurate information. But nowadays, we have computers. And if you're good with programming, you can set up your matrix in your program. Most people would use Python. And when you have it set up once, it's there and it's safe. So yes, you got to put the time in originally to get it properly coded to send things around. But once you have it, you can just hit some buttons on there and it will calculate the entirety of this huge complex company I described in about the same amount of time that it took me just to do the two departments right there. And if you're not into building that stuff yourself, I'm sure there's all sorts of services out there where you can pay another entity to hook you up with an interface that'll do it as well. So my ending thought for this presentation right here is as time goes on, managerial accountants, cost accountants, are going to have to be required to do more complex calculations because we have the technology now that's going to allow you to do so in a time efficient manner. You used to be able to get away with some kind of approximation method, like a high-low method or a step-down method or something like that. And I think as time goes on, it's going to just be industry standard that everybody's going to want you to do more complex but more accurate calculations because you get better information. So if you get the chance during your studies to take any type of class in data science where you learn how to use Python or R or some kind of programming language to be able to set up your own formulas like this, please do so. It'll be super beneficial for the rest of your career.